Hey everybody, and welcome back. This is Ariel Halevi here with another episode in the second season of my podcast, The Greater Context. Now, I have to say that I am especially excited about today's episode because my guest is not just a super interesting and talented person, but rather the first time he and I met many years ago, he was actually an up-and-coming trainer in our very own company, which was at the time still known as Debate Company, today Vayomar. Now today, he is a rising star in Israel's Ministry of Foreign Affairs and currently serves as Consul for Public Diplomacy in Chicago. Of course, he also holds a doctorate in identity studies. I'm talking about my dear friend, Mr. Daniel Aschheim. Now, Daniel and I discussed all kinds of interesting topics, including the delicate balance between having innate talent, being born with certain traits, and good old-fashioned good luck. We also took a closer look at the impact of COVID-19 on the core workings of diplomacy, and at a larger context, what impact the digital revolution is having on the very nature of interpersonal communication. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation with Daniel. I hope you will as well. Let's begin. Mr. Daniel Aschheim, or should I say, Consulate General of Israel in Chicago, Mr. Aschheim.
Thank you very much. Shalom.
So I have to say that, and I think I told you this already, we're in the middle of our second season of this podcast, and I've really had an amazing opportunity to speak with and meet with some incredible people. This I'm very excited about for a very unique reason, which is you used to work with us. You used to be part of Vayomar when we were still called Debate Company. How long ago was that? When was your last year with us?
So true. I started my career, my real career, I would say, at Debate Vayomar. It was my first real job, so-called, even though I worked in different things, but this was not anymore a student job. It was a serious full-time job for me. And I did it when I studied during my last year of my bachelor's at IDC in Herzliya. So I worked there between 2013 and 2015.
So 2015, you end your role with us after fruitful 3 years. I remember seeing you, by the way. The first time I ever saw you was in a company activity, and different trainers were supposed to get up and do something with the rest of the trainers, which I don't know if people know is the hardest possible audience you could ever train in front of, even though everybody was so open-hearted. And I was so impressed that it left a mark. And then I saw you a few other times, and I'm like, okay, I know this person's going places. Where did you go? What was your next step?
Thank you for the compliments, first of all. And I must say that I never see it as where did I go, because I really truly believe that each one of these steps were significant in my career and my development, personal and professional development. And I truly say that not as lip service, but really, I really think that each one of the jobs that I did, starting from catering when I was 17 to being a substitute teacher when I finished school, then working at the King David Hotel for 5 years, also when I was at Vayomar Debate, the same time as concierge, then at Vayomar, and then at the later stages, the other things that I did, which I'm going to talk about in a second. But I truly think that each one of these stages brought tools and ideas and curiosity and skill sets that kept on going with me throughout my life and career. I'm still very young, so I hope it will continue. I'm going to continue to build more and more things. But I think that the work and debate at Vayomar really gave me the understanding. First of all, I worked there in the first year. I was a senior trainer for the younger population, for students in high schools. I had the privilege to work in 4 schools. 2 of them are considered the elite schools in Israel, the top-notch schools, and the other 2 are considered last chance opportunities for children. So it was completely different audience, completely different work. And you need to approach each one of them like you are natural to come to this audience. And you know, later, many years later, when I started diplomacy, it's exactly the same thing. So you need to find the right way to speak to the different crowd and different people and not make the other person think that you came especially like you're doing a show or you're trying to build something that you're not, but actually really genuinely getting connected to them. And when I worked in debate in Vayomar, I taught public speaking, message building, confidence building, storytelling, all of the skill set, which I think was very helpful for the children. And I still did an event. Actually, this is very interesting. Last month, I did an event, a Zoom event here in Chicago as Consul for Public Diplomacy. And I didn't know who is participating in these Zooms. And suddenly we did. It was actually a international chess competition, a virtual competition between Israel and the Midwest that we did.
Oh, okay.
And I opened it because it was a very exciting moment for us. It's a part of the solidarity chess competitions for COVID. And suddenly I get a message by instant saying, someone, "Hi, Daniel, I'm not sure if you remember, you were my teacher at debate in 2013. And still then I remember, and I don't stop using the things that you taught me." And I mean, this is really a closing of a circle. And I think, am I getting this all the time, not only from other people, of saying what they learned from it. The second year I worked with the adults, with teachers, with business, with companies, with other leaders of community and more. Yeah. And I think that also the skills that I learned via doing these things are something that it's very hard to measure today how much it gave to me, because I've used it every step of my career later on. The skill set that I learned and the dealing with the different people, speaking in front of the audience, building the messages correctly, and the storytelling that we heard from you, Ariel. You and Gur, when you came to us in the beginning, in the IDC still, it was you say you remember that. I remember that we had our orientation week in the IDC in 2013. Right. And they told us here we have two alumni who are very accomplished alumni who opened their business, very successful business. And here, your presentation. So you always say you're a bit skeptical. What can they give me new? What can they deliver that I never heard before? We heard 10 conversations and more, and we were astonished. And then I said, yes, I have to join this company. And it took me a year, and I joined this later on. And I think it was really, really an amazing beginning.
Listen, this experience of the two really interesting things that just come to my mind listening to you is, one, just the incredible privilege of being able to touch somebody's life. Sometimes we don't realize just exactly how much we've touched. By the way, for better or for worse, I think sometimes we don't realize how much we might have hurt somebody. We sometimes don't understand how meaningful we were. And that kid that basically said, "Do you remember I was a student?" I mean, to have the privilege of anchoring something early in somebody's life that they feel that they take with, for me at least, has always been a core part of this calling. And I think seeing you train, I believe the feeling was similar for you. The second thing that comes to mind with me is, you know, you're a serial exceller, so to speak. It sounds better in Hebrew, right? But I mean, you were doing really great stuff long before all the stuff that we're talking about. I mean, I think you won the student union elections in high school, if I recall correctly, and you were recognized by the president of Israel at an early age. I would love to hear more about that. For me, what I'm hearing that we can talk about is the relationship between raw, born talent and then good training, good tutors, good mentorship, good methodologies, hard work. Like, what would you say is the ratio? How much of where you're going in life, and a lot of what you've done already, you've probably seen a lot of leaders already in your career, how much do you think is just like you're born with it and it will take you there? And how much do you think it's more about how lucky you are to have the right teachers and so on and so forth?
So I'll start by quoting something I learned in debate, I think in the first week that I worked there, that they said, you know, not everyone will become an Olympic winner in swimming, but everyone can learn how to swim. So I really truly believe that that's the role for life. This is the way we should look at life. Nevertheless, if we have the potential and we don't know how to use the potential, then we'll stay with all our life saying, people will say he had the potential, she had the potential, and we'll never do it. We hear a lot of football, soccer players, they said he has so much potential and he finished his career with having potential. So therefore, it's not enough being smart or being eager for success. It needs to be combined. And I think you do come with a certain you come from home, from your environment, from school, from what you read, from what you hear, from everything you see, from places you traveled. You come with a certain point that you start your life with. And then you need also the good mentors. You need some luck. You need to work very hard. You need to know what you want to do. And sometimes it comes absolutely out of nowhere. And I'll give you this example. You mentioned high school. And this is something that happened completely without planning. And it really changed my life completely. And these decisions also, I had other points in my life that it happened also. But I think this one was the most important one. So this was when I was 17 years old in Bet Chinuch High School in Jerusalem, very basic, mediocre high school in Jerusalem, had some great students, had some less, had some great teachers, had some less. So it was a combination of everything, very regular Jerusalem school. And I was never interested in anything more than myself and my friends there. We went to school and back and forth. And I studied and went home. So I was never involved in anything else in school. And then one day, this was, when I was in Kita Yud Aleph in 11th grade of high school. And they asked to do elections for the class student council, not the school student council, but the class. Right. Exactly, the 20, 30 people in your class. I was elected second place. And fine, I said, I just wanted to do it. Maybe I can get out of class once here, once there. And then they said there's the school student union that is convening the first time of the year, and the one who was chosen first in each class should go there. And I was lucky enough that the girl who was chosen was sick that day, so she couldn't go. And I was chosen to go there, and I went there. And I saw there were 20 people. I've never heard of the student council at all in the school, never did anything. Never heard that I didn't even know that it exists. And then they said, okay, so we are doing the vote here. We are ratifying again, Mr. I will not mention his name, that he will be chosen again to be the president of the student council. I didn't even know he's president. And they said, I didn't really have great relationship with him on a personal level in my scouts in the Tzofim. So I said, you know what, for the sport, I'm raising my hand. I object. Everyone looked. I didn't think about it for a second, Ariel. And people looked, who is this guy who's saying he's 1 year older than me? And then she said, the teacher who was responsible said, okay, according to protocol, we have to do elections then if there's an objection. Said, yeah, we're doing. She said, we'll do it here in the council. I said, no. We are doing it in school. First time in school, for the whole school. And everyone looked, okay, what does protocol say? And then they said, according to protocol, when there's a demand. So we did that. And and Ariel, it was not planned. I didn't think about it for a second before. I just said for the sport of the moment. And from that moment, I said, this is going to be what I'm taking. This is going to be my goal now for the next few months. This is the whole thing anything that I'm going to do is going to be related to that. I opened a campaign. I got people running with me. There was signs all over the German colony in Jerusalem. There were newspaper articles. We really motivated people. We did debates in the lobby between the candidates. The whole school eventually elected me. And I needed to start working. And then I needed to start being I promised many things, from drinking fountains to work against violence.
Wait a minute. What does that have anything to do with it? Since when does promising something in an election mean you're expected to do it?
Never. But that was even before the fake news era. So then everyone used to be, you were accountable for everything. No social media. They came, Daniel Aschheim, you promised us 1-2 ping pong tables and everything. I just gave promises. But then I said, look, I already got this opportunity. I'm going to really make it happen. And we started doing with my team. It was not me alone. It was with a great team that we had. And we started doing one after the other, all the things we promised, together with the principal of the school, who really got engaged and loved the fact that we did it. And we really did everything of the things that we promised. And this led to another thing, which led to another thing, which led to activity in the regional council, student council, in the national student council. And we won the award for the best school council in the country by the President's Award, which was elected by the Ministry of Education. And for many activities that we did, I'll just give you one example. I always liked trivia, general knowledge quizzes. And then I said, how do we engage the students with it? So every Friday I sat down, I did it in the army also after, in the A200 unit. There was also the quiz. People knew about it then. But then I did the questionnaire. So it was everything. Who was the philosopher that claimed that God is dead? who were the four presidents of the United States who were murdered, all the questions that you can imagine,
Right.
from sports, culture, and everything. And the winners will be the ones who will fill this questionnaire correctly, will get tickets for the Beitar Jerusalem games, football games, and the ones who want to get also the tickets for these games need to show improvement in behavior in school and grades. And I was monitoring the kids. They came to me, kids
Amazing.
who were yelling and throwing things in the hallway, started saying, "Hey, my brother, who is this philosopher who said that?" And they showed me their grades and behavior. And this was what we got the
They're
award for.
showing you this, right? You're 17 years old.
True. But I think it really
I don't
changed
know,
me also.
Listen, I think it's such an interesting dilemma. You and I come from a background of education which inherently believes in the potential of people to increase and to grow and to become bigger than what they may think that they are. And then you hear a story like this and you think, yeah, but this is ingrained in Daniel's DNA, right? I mean, and I keep thinking all of this because that girl was sick that day. I mean, think about revolving doors, right? Think about, that's incredible. That is incredible. But I guess, I think you and I spoke about the famous commencement speech by Steve Jobs. Are you familiar with that speech where he talks about you can never connect the dots looking forward, but it's very easy to connect the dots looking backwards. When you kind of look back on your life, it suddenly all makes perfect sense. It all had to happen the way that it happened. I think it's just to think about this. You did something pretty amazing in Senegal, right? You basically, so I'm skipping a few stages, we'll go back to it, but you ultimately decided to apply to be a cadet in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the State of Israel, correct? This was what year?
This was 2018. I started the cadet course 2018, January, so I applied 2017.
Got it, okay. And again, it's a very interesting intersection because we trained quite a few classes over the years of cadets. So I know how rigorous that program can be and how grueling it is. And then your first posting was Senegal.
Senegal, correct.
Tell me about, so I know that's considered, the first post you get as a cadet straight out of the program mostly is usually a little harder, right? It's more of a remote, difficult. So
not harder, more challenging.
More challenging, of course, and with greater potential, one would say.
Right.
That seems to be the key word for our session today. So you're married at the time, correct?
True.
You go home and you tell your wife, guess what?
Actually, she was in Germany. She was in France in a study trip of the university. She was in a tunnel in a bus with a group, and we were supposed to get the placements one day later when we were supposed to sit and discuss it together. But we got it one day earlier, and I took the phone and I phoned her.
Alyssa,
I didn't hear from her for 2 days after telling her. It took a while to realize what's happening to our lives. And then she came out, she returned. I got a picture. The first picture I got from her was her in France next to the Senegalese embassy there, taking a picture smiling. And then I said, fine, we are going to make this happen.
Amazing.
And so this was the message. But actually, I wanted to tell you, you're asking about Senegal. This brings exactly to the story about the girl who was sick that day. We had exactly the same story in Senegal, which led to what we did later. And Senegal, as I said, is a French-speaking country. My French at that time was saying bonjour, comment ça va, and merci. And I said, fine, I'm coming to a country. I'm sure we'll have a lot of people speaking English to me, though, and then I'll slowly learn French. And I came, and I understood that my workers who I was responsible for spoke only French. So not all of them, but some of them. And then I understood that the working environment is solely French. So I said, what am I going to do here? So all the things that I learned, all the excitement, all the enthusiasm is here, and I'm just without the tools to do it. How can I manage here? So a week after I came, we barely had we were still at the hotel.
Wait, I'm sorry, but this begs the question. I mean, I think we spoke about this. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs does take you through a preliminary, what would we call it, orientation process, right? That includes private lessons in French and some cross-culture. Was that, I mean, obviously that's not going to close the entire gap, but were you given some kind of from orientation program?
So from the moment I got I got notified that I'm going to Senegal, I did get assigned a private teacher, and I tried to do it as much intensively as I could. So I did reach a higher level of understanding. It was very hard for me speaking, but it was a very short time. It was a month between the time that I knew I'm flying and going.
Oh, wow. That's incredible.
So it was very intensive. Yeah. So I tried to get the most. I did get the most. But still, it's a foreign country. It's a foreign language, not an easy language. And a week after, we were invited to one of the German organizations, one of the German foundations. They had an event there with a German minister, and I was invited. Of course, the event was also in French, so I didn't understand much. It was not very interesting for me. And I said to my wife, Elisa, you know what, we saw enough. We said we did the niceties, let's leave after 30 minutes. She said, if we're already here, why not we stay? Maybe we'll have some food in the end and meet some people. I said, okay. And then my friend there, the director of the foundation, Thomas Falk, told me, I want to introduce to you a friend of mine, Michaela. Michaela is an entrepreneur. I said to him, hi, Michaela, in French. I tried to say, he said, no, I speak English. I said, you speak English? Fantastic. Can you come tomorrow to the consulate, to the embassy? He said, yes. Okay. I said, you come tomorrow. I talked to him the day after. I heard that he's an entrepreneur, he has innovation and more. I said, good. You have a group of 20 English speakers. That's what I need. Just people who speak English and young. I said, yes. I said, great. We are doing together the Israel-Senegal Startup Initiative starting in 2 weeks from now, 5 sessions. I took the skill sets from debate, how to present, how to build your speech, how to build your pitch, how to speak in front of the audience. I said, this is the tools that I have as Daniel. We don't have enough budget now because there was no budget that year because of the government changes. So why not do it? And we really built it. We modeled it and we started, and it grew and grew and grew. And from that, we started doing West Africa startup summits, international conventions. And we opened leadership groups. We had more and more. We had hundreds of Senegalese young entrepreneurs joining these programs. We started bringing experts from Israel. We got special attention. We brought people from Germany, from Israel, through Zoom and not through Zoom. They came physically. And then we opened a leadership group called Agents of Change, which is a group that we compiled. We did an application. We had thousands of people applying. We did a long screening process. And in the end, we had 20 people chosen to each cohort. We really built for them training, capacity building training, how to become an entrepreneur, a businessman, social entrepreneur, and more. And the highlight was after having this, and actually 2 weeks ago, I spoke in the American-Israel Friendship League with a minister from Senegal about that achievement and one of the alumni who was part of this Agents of Change program. And the highlight was we organized the first ecosystem seminar to bring all the members of the ecosystem for innovation of Senegal and making Senegal the startup nation of Africa by 2030. And they never worked together. So we brought the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Information and Science, private sector, all of them together. And it was a fantastic achievement. All because of the English.
Well, the English, the initiative, by the way, this is a good chance to circle back because we keep talking about, a lot of the tools that you feel that you got at debate. We had another cross section, you and I. You're also an alumni of Stand With Us Israel.
So I'm an alumni, not directly of the Stand With Us, but I was the alumni of the Mike's program, which was part of the Stand With Us.
Right. Which stemmed out of, right, okay.
Exactly. I was 3 years in that, which was an amazing experience at the IDC.
So if I remember correctly, I hope I'm not making a mistake here. So when Stand With Us came to Israel, I was, lucky enough that they engaged us to help design their Israeli program. And then we ran it for a few years with universities. They include launching initiatives, which is what made me think about you in this context of the startup initiative. One of the initiatives was this program that 3 years later, remained sustainable and that you were part of. So was that relevant to your experience in Senegal, or did I just mix up stuff?
Definitely was relevant. So the Mike's was the Media in Conflict seminar. We brought young journalists from all over the world to come for 5 days intensive learning about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, through tours, through bringing experts from Israeli experts, Palestinian experts, and more. And this was, again, a great tool of how to initiate, how to manage, how to build, how to plan, how to come with sophisticated ideas with limited resources. So this is, as Israelis, we always learn we're not very good in long-term planning. We are very good in short-term planning, ad hoc planning. And part of it is knowing how to get out of where, if you're stuck somewhere, you learn how to overcome from the side and not dwell into why you're not succeeding, but finding solutions, how to overcome them. And when we don't have a budget, you find the budget from another source. You partner with someone. You build content. You need to build the best content. You use every connection possible to build it. So, of course, these are things as a diplomat you need to do on a daily basis. You need to move along the way. You don't know what's planning. You don't know what are going to be the things that you'll need to discuss, to promote,
ingenuity,
to initiate.
Entrepreneurship, persistence, proactivity.
Exactly.
Amazing. It really is. Okay. So tell me more about, so you land in Senegal, you barely speak French, you don't know many of the people. That year, the government in Israel is in rotation. There's no budget. This is your first posting, right? As a foreign ministry diplomat of the state of Israel. How do you summarize that experience?
Wow, it's very hard summarizing because it really was such a significant experience. First, I had the privilege to working with a true mentor, Ambassador Roy Rosenblit, who is a friend, a mentor, and he made our experience a true experience. And my wife, of course, who came after that first shock, she came with a lot of excitement and enthusiasm. She worked at the embassy with me, so it was also an interesting dynamic to work with your partner in the same workplace.
It kind of prepared you for COVID, working from home.
We were 2 years there working. It was exact for us. There was not so much difference. Exactly. So we were all the time together anyway. Now with the babies, even more. And it was a combination between an adventure, something that is unimagined because we don't know how to imagine these places. We don't see movies about them. And when we see, they're very stereotypical movies. We imagine what we want. We see Africa with the colorful Africa, and you see that the challenges of living in a place like that are things that you don't imagine. We had a week with no water in the house. We had days without electricity. Yeah, at the house, at the building. So we needed to find a place to get to shower. I mean, but we are not the problem because eventually we live in better conditions than the rest. And then you need to be very modest and humble and be grateful for what you have. And also see the people you are working there with as partners and not to look from above and tell them, we know what's better, but we are partners. We're working together with you. And this was also the success of the entrepreneurship programs. We listen to understand what are their real needs. And based on their needs, we tailor-made it to what they are, exactly like in business. If you're in Vayomar, you're looking at the client, you're asking him, what is the client interested in? You build your program accordingly. It's exactly the same in diplomacy.
Right. You
need to bring Israel into the needs of the local population. What we do in Chicago, what we do in Indiana, Wisconsin, or the Dakotas is completely different than what we will do in Senegal or the Gambia. And we did beautiful programs there. But it's a combination between a challenge, personal challenge, not easy, living in a different environment, different culture, different life standards that we are used to. On the other hand, having opportunities and stories that you will never get in any Western country that you are used to, all the things that are happening there. We took a car 14 hours to the other side of the most remote village in the south, through border crossings, bridges, ferries, and no places to stop in the middle. Amazing experiences, which really you'll say to you, I'm sure our grandchildren will want to hear about.
And I recall opening up Facebook. I follow you religiously on Facebook. I love your posts.
Thank you.
And I recall listening to you give a speech in French. So you actually ended up being able to get up in front of an audience and deliver a speech in French.
True. To tell you that it's easy and comfortable, I'll need to lie. It's still it's a challenge because you feel when it's a foreign language that you don't feel comfortable with, you feel like you are losing the other added values that you have as whoever you are, your skill set. And yet I was told that it was pretty good. So I don't know how they saw it or how do I sound to them. In the end, I was very proud that I could do the last week that I was in Senegal. I did a live television interview in French. I think I'll never do it again. I can't
No,
see
don't
myself
say
doing
that.
it today. Maybe I'll need to refresh my memory, but as an achievement, I was very proud that I managed to do it after exactly the story I said in the beginning, that it was only English. Later on, it went to French, then it became only French in the end.
Incredible. And then, just as you're done getting comfortable with this extremely different environment, you've gotten the relationships going, you've started initiatives, you've given a speech in French, you get called for your next position.
We are missing something there. Ariel, there was a bit of a period of something else happening before I got this phone. So it's true, I got the phone. Because my wife was supposed to deliver, we were expecting a baby, and we applied to move to the next position, and then we got the list. The world was normal. We are talking about January 2020. The world looks like a nice place.
Wow.
There's something happening there in the East. We don't know what it is. It's a weird thing with a few people in China having it, but the world goes on. We get in February 2020 assignment to Chicago. We are starting to get very excited, looking into things, looking at apartments, looking at where to go, where are we going to travel. Everything is beautiful. My wife was supposed to deliver somewhere in May, and we're supposed to go to Israel for the delivery. And March is beginning, and Israel is starting to apply a quarantine for people returning. And my wife was in Germany. I was in Senegal. And from day to day, they are canceling more and more flights. Europe is closing down. Senegal is closing its borders. It was like the Exodus, moving to find ourselves not to miss the birth. And we were both from Germany, from Senegal, one of the last flights before they closed the borders for 4 months. We were in Israel for the birth. And suddenly all this thing that was supposed to be an easy transition, moving from Senegal to Chicago, became something surreal. Something that we couldn't imagine. Will it happen? We were stuck. The airports were closed. My wife was 2 months with a baby in Germany. I was in Senegal 2 months alone. We didn't know when the flights will resume, what is going to happen. And we came to Chicago in September 2020 into a completely different world. So a world of Zoom. And what we are doing now is one thing, but the fact that we are here living in Chicago, but we are living the virtual real, is something that I still till today, it's very hard for me to grasp, because we are such people to people. We are people who are people to people.
I mean, there are a lot of industries that were directly affected in the most obvious way, like tourism and travel and so on. How the heck do you adjust field? I don't know if it's an industry or field of diplomacy, which is designed, the whole thing we talked about was you get on a plane, you go to Senegal, you immerse yourself in the geolocation that represents your mandate for that period of time. Suddenly, who cares where you are? How does that affect the foreign ministry, where it doesn't really matter where the representatives are?
It's a very good question. It really is a true challenge. I will start by answering a bit of before COVID. So before COVID, there was a real understanding in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Israel, one of the first actually foreign ministries in the world to acknowledge the digital transition. So if we look in a really nutshell, you are an expert in history and philosophy and many more things, but you know that eventually the diplomacy started by envoys going to a place to sign on an agreement, going back. Sometimes people kill the envoy, but you say, don't kill the envoy, you need to go to him. But this was the job of diplomats. They sometimes took months to get from place to place, but eventually they were situated in a place, and that was the communication method. Later on, we had everything became easier traveling, and in the last, let's say, 10 years, travel has become so pre-COVID, so easy, so accessible, so quick. And technology came. So suddenly the prime minister can talk to the other prime minister, or president to president, king to king, through Zoom, or whatever it is, whatever platform it is. Who needs you?
Who needs the middle person, basically?
Exactly. So the question, when people said, who needs the middle people? We can close down the diplomatic corps. Who needs them? It's between the leaders and leaders. You come, you go, you fly, you sign an agreement, you go home. And the Ministry of Foreign Affairs understood that, first of all, you need to see the world is changing, and we need to be very, very relevant in the digital arena. And they opened the digital diplomacy wing in the foreign ministry, which is dedicated to bring diplomacy into the new era of technology through various methods, if it's videos, if it's communication, if it's building communication through the new influencers, the younger generation, not only talk to the elderly, but reach out to the influencers through tours in Israel, through culinary, through culture, and any.
Just to be clear, these initiatives are beginning before COVID.
Correct. These are started in the last, I think, 5 years. A lot of emphasis was put on this, on their understanding. And we in the course, we started our course in 2018, before COVID. We had about 30% of the content were digital diplomacy and how to stay relevant during these days and not lag behind, which is very, very clever and a very, very insightful move to understand and predict what the future will be. No one can predict, but still it was a movement. Then came COVID. And actually, before I'm going to say something about COVID, I said before about who needs the middleman. So the basic misconception of diplomacy is the thinking that it's enough that the leaders come, sign an agreement, and go home.
Very transactional.
What happens? Exactly, it's a transaction, but it's not enough. When it's done, there's, like we say in Hebrew, for every Shabbat, there's a Motzei Shabbat. For every Saturday, there's the after-Sabbath.
Wait. We got to do a time. I'm sorry. We got to do a time out of that because that is such it's such a deeply ingrained cultural idiom in Israel that I'm afraid other people may not understand. So I feel we must explain, right? So when you go to basic training in Israel, they train the heck out of you. I mean, depending on which program you're in, but they make you run and push-ups and you barely sleep and everything. But the Sabbath is sacred. And so even if, no matter which unit you're in pretty much in the army, on Saturday, the weekend is time off. They can't drill you. They can't make you run. And what they always say to us is the commanding officers will say, okay, you go rest, you read your newspaper, you ignore me, don't worry about it. For every Saturday, there's Saturday evening when the Sabbath is over and the new week begins. And that saying is, don't worry, we're taking notes. The weekend's going to be over and I'm going to be here and you're going to pay the piper. And so that's such a powerful idiom. I felt it was worth expanding for our listeners. Please, keep going.
No, so thank you. Exactly, that's correct. And the same like in the army, it comes here. The leaders come to the diplomats who are on the ground and say, okay, fellows, it was nice, a nice agreement signed. Now it's time to deliver. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the people who deliver are the diplomats on the ground who are there all the time, need to come with ideas, need to build content into these agreements. And this is also the case for the large framework. If we're looking at agreements between countries, there's a huge difference between an agreement that's signed between two leaders, however friendly they are and good relationship they are. If it's just between the leaders, what happens when the leaders finish? The leaders finish their term and there's nothing built. And we are here to build the grassroots, to make sure that the relationship is not based on leaders to leaders. Leadership will always be the most important. But then we need to make sure that it's based people to people, society to society, economy to economy. There'll be a lot of things connecting societies and people that it doesn't matter who the leaders are, the relationship will remain very strong. And this is exactly a great example of the relationship between Israel and the United States. Regardless of the leadership and who is friendly with who has better personal connection, it's of course very important. But eventually the common values, the shared values, shared interests, and win-win situations, this is what forms the Israel-America relationship. And this is diplomacy in general.
I love it because basically you're talking about something very important, which is creating the kind of infrastructure that will secure a self-sustaining kind of momentum, not fully self-sustaining, right? I mean, you are constantly adding fuel to the fire. You are constantly reinforcing the foundations through activities and publications and relationships and interactions. But I think really a lot of people don't understand that there's like the tip of the iceberg, which is what we read in the newspaper or the handshake on TV. And then there's the entire like 97% of that iceberg, which is a lot of people that have decided to dedicate their life to public service, such as yourself, who are doing the daily work of making sure that that's going to be there. And then when it happens, like you mentioned the United States, it's been done so well, so continuously and consistently over how many decades now, that it can actually endure sandstorms and political, conflicts, because we know that some leaders don't get along with one another. But that level, that bureaucratic level of diplomacy, is actually extremely important.
Exactly. You said it better than me.
So how do you, nevertheless, a lot of that has to do with, correct me if I'm wrong, this is my assumption, a big part of diplomacy is your ability to become so well immersed in the geography that you are responsible for, that it allows you to absorb the culture, the nuance. It allows you to enjoy unexpected or serendipitous encounters that you can use to whip up a new relationship, gatherings, experiences. You don't have that right now. I mean, a lot of that, how do you do that from your home?
This is true. It makes it much more challenging. There's no way to make it less of a challenge than it is. And it's a challenge for everyone, I think, for every person in the human race today, to build personal connections, and even more for us as diplomats, because this is the core essence of our job. And as you asked before, why not sit in Tel Aviv or in Jerusalem? What is the added value that we hear? So what we did here in the Consulate General of Israel to Chicago, together with Consul General Aviv Ezra, who is doing a fantastic job in that for many months already, and the team at the consulate, we are trying to find relevant methods and ways to engage the local, I would say, leadership. It could be the Jewish leadership, but not only the Jewish leadership, the economy, engage the cultural scene, engage with other frameworks if it's connected to COVID. We built a program now of 5-6 sessions of relevance in COVID. So we're bringing experts from Israel together with experts from local institutions here. We did an event about the ethics of how do you treat and how do you deal with COVID on the ethical framework, with a Professor David Head from Israel, who is a specialist for bioethics with the University of Chicago's bioethics department. We are doing now with directors of hospitals. Professor Yonatan Halevi from Shaarei Tzedek will be with Professor from Loyola Hospital here. So we are always trying to build relevant things according to the time. And we are doing about COVID and mental health session with Enosh from Israel. We are doing about gender issues and COVID. So we are trying to be relevant all the time and not talk about things which are not related and people don't care about. We need to remember, of course, we need to deal now with the ICC decision. So we try to find also interesting ways of doing briefings through Zoom to different audiences. And we do Zoom sessions in various ways and try and be creative all the time in the way we can.
Listen, you're blowing my mind, because when I asked you this question, I wasn't expecting such an answer, because it really felt to me like probably we're just waiting for the wave to pass. But not at all.
Not at all.
This is incredible. I mean, these are so many. How many of these different initiatives that you've mentioned can we look up online and read about?
All of them. I'll even give you an example that was at the consulate 3 days ago. We had an amazing event with a partnership, innovation and technology, research and development between the Sheba Hospital, the city of Chicago, and Kaleidoscope, a local organization. We had the governor of Illinois, Pritzker, together with Minister Gabi Ashkenazi, foreign minister, sitting together in a ceremony, dedicating it and opening the Research and Development Center here, which will be with Israeli technology. It's an amazing, extraordinary thing. So you can follow us on Israel in Chicago, in the Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and my personal accounts, Daniel Aschheim. We have an Aviv Ezra Consul General. We put all of this is online. The chess competition we did, musical we did for the holidays, musical events, joint musical events. We try to do the most we can.
We're going to make a list of all of these links, and we'll add them to the webpage that's hosting this recording. I'm out of breath just listening. I mean, it's almost as if you're not just bouncing back, you're bouncing forward. How many of the things you're doing now are moving faster because of COVID? Are there any advantages to COVID?
Saying there's advantages to COVID would be a hard thing to say, but we can't ignore the fact, look, again, as a diplomat, as a person who likes interconnections, direct, I think there's no comparison to face-to-face interaction. There will never be. We need the human touch. We need to talk to an audience to engage. And I'll start by saying the most problematic aspect, let's say people are going to conferences in university, people, or to any convention. People go to the convention not to hear the lecture, even if it's Ariel Halevi speaking or it's another TED speaker. They come for the coffee breaks and to schmooze and mingle
of course.
between. In the Zoom world, we lost the schmoozing and small talk. And there's only the seconds before and the questions and answers in the end. And we lose the difference. So there's no difference today if you speak to a 17-year-old in a high school or the board of the most important company. We are looking at the computer screen. And therefore, this is the biggest disadvantage.
I'm sorry. I'm cutting you off.
No, please. Okay, I just wanted to say, on the other hand, the advantage here is the fact that the geographic boundaries are not existing anymore. And we are responsible for 9 states in the Midwest. And if they were not for COVID, I would not have seen these. And today I'm doing events with hundreds of people all over the region. And there's no difference if they're in Chicago, Minneapolis, or Detroit. And we are speaking and engaging in conversations with people who we never used to come to programs. They sit there in their homes without going to the very cold weather outside, and they find themselves engaged in conversation, and we have a lot more exposure. So this, of course, is the added value into new audiences.
This is as close as we've ever come to teleportation.
Exactly.
Just teleport with Zoom to anywhere you want to be. You know, you made me, so I've been involved, I wonder if you probably have heard of Joanna Landau and this NGO called Vibe Israel. They do a very visionary program that was actually born out of an initiative by the Foreign Ministry. So Ido Aharoni was, before he became Consul General for New York, was responsible for the Israel Brand Israel initiative. And when all that research was done, and they defined the brand and everything, one of the people that was volunteering there, Joanna Landau, decided to set up an NGO that would basically proactively promote Israel's brand. And it's been nothing but a pleasure to see her just soar. And this year, she did her annual Friends of, the whole thing, the annual conference on Zoom. And she did something incredible. To your point about mingling in the rooms, in the corridors. The session started with a 2-minute welcome, and then everybody, 300 people, were broken up into smaller rooms. 5 minutes of schmoozing. Come back. 30-minute session. Breakout. Schmooze. Come back. It was amazing. And I suddenly met people I hadn't spoken to for a year, for 2 years, and we reconnected. So it's an interesting best practice to think about. And I remember calling her afterwards and saying, I gotta do a podcast with you. You have to share your bit, because everybody's doing virtual conferences right now. And the prevailing paradigm is some things cannot be captured. And I think that was an example of probably the closest thing to a real life conference that I'd come across. So that's great. Okay, so you're doing all of these things, but you're still counting the days till things open up and you can go. And I mean, you and I are kind of similar in that way. I would stand in my balcony and just wave at people walking by just for some human contact. So what's next? What's on your agenda now? What are some of the things that are in the oven that you can speak about?
So we are working on, as I mentioned before, the COVID program is one of the most important programs we are doing. We are preparing for Earth Day in the end of April. We are doing 4 different activities concerning environment, sustainability. We are doing a convention in one of the universities. We're going to have Yosef Abramovich from Energia Global in Israel speak. We're going to have Ambassador Gidon Bachar, who is the special envoy for sustainability, speak with a Pulitzer-winning journalist from Iowa. We are going to work on a trivia, on a social media campaign trivia. Yeah, it's going to be again trivia, but with no students' councils anymore. So that's what we're going to do for Earth Day. We're going to do for Women's Day, another activity. So we're trying also to find, as I mentioned before, relevant days on the calendar. And of course, besides that, I'm also doing all the time, we're doing ongoing talks. So to the Israel Policy Forum and to young Jewish adults, we're trying to build the relationship to make it stronger between the younger population, the more liberal and progressive, who are feeling less and less connected to Israel, and we are trying to change it through real, honest, direct, and open conversation. And this is what we are trying to do on a daily basis. So we're trying to reach out to as many groups as possible.
Have you considered opening up the events to people beyond the geography because it's on Zoom and anybody can join? Are these events open to beyond the boundaries of your mandate? Because that can be a little bit that might conflict with activities that other consulates are doing.
Great point, because this point is the key point of discussing, and this, I think, is the most important key point for everything in the world that's happening, not connected to Israel or diplomacy. We all know that today, every activity could be relevant for everyone around the world. Every conversation could be relevant for another person. So what is the added value of closed group activities,
Right, yeah.
or regional activities? There's no real sense to the regional. Nevertheless, we do think there is a sense, because people want to feel intimate, want to feel exclusive. And if everything you open up, even though there's no difference if you speak to someone in New York now, Washington, Ohio, or Wisconsin, people still feel that you close it to their group like it's a group. And that's the challenge, to make people still feel like a group. If not, they get lost in humanity. And people look for community, even though, because then you would say, why does every synagogue do a tfilat, a Friday night prayer on Zoom today, here in the Reform communities, not just do one Reform community doing it for the whole country or for the whole world? And because people say we do want to feel like we're a sense of our community, and it's a true challenge. Because why is it a community sense? Is it really a community sense, seeing people on the screen? It's back and forth. Some days it looks yes, some days it looks backward, but it's a true challenge. It's a great point you asked, and it's not going to be easy to see where we are going with it.
This is remarkable. You know, so we've been doing what we're doing for 18 years now. And I think I sat, I don't know if it's a year ago, a year and a half ago, and I reflected. And I asked myself, what's the common thread of everything that we were doing? And I basically came back with this idea of all human-related issues in the workplace. Doesn't matter if the workplace is commercial, NGO, public sector. We believe somehow can be rooted back to a growing gap between our ability to innovate and our ability to adapt. Meaning, our brain is still predominantly a 400,000-year-old operating system that hasn't caught up yet with the environmental changes that we're going through. And the point you just made just resonates on that so strongly, because what creates a sense of identity? And if I open it up to everybody, then I'm not special, right? That's very much a paradigm of scarcity kind of state of mind. It has to be scarce to be valuable. If you let everybody in, then who am I? On the other hand, to me, the fact that the world is becoming a smaller village with every day and year that passes is a key factor in humanity's advancement and in the shift from scarcity to abundance. So I'm just wondering, what would happen if all the synagogues decided to rotate once a week for everybody? And what would that do? And they would start thinking about, well, what do I do about fundraising? I got to be special, and we don't need so many rabbis if one rabbi. It's really very, very interesting to see the tension that grows between the potential that exists in modern times and human nature, and how it might fit into that. That's remarkable.
It's more than that. You're correct completely, because this is going to be a challenge for the business world. They will say, why do we need to have an office in the city center of downtown Chicago, downtown New York, in Manhattan, when we can have Ariel sitting in his house, or in we'll do one hub somewhere in the country, and the people will work from home. So this will be cutting of jobs, changes of relevance, and this is going to be, I am afraid that this can really be a dramatic shift, because this COVID came too quickly. We're talking about historical changes. We're talking about years. We're talking about decades. We're talking about, with the iPhone, a year, 2 years. But never has the world actively closed itself, even in world wars, which were much worse, of course, but the economies mobilized themselves. Countries said, we are using our economy for war efforts. Here, it's the first time in history the whole world shut itself completely, and we don't know where we are going from here. So there's no other example in history to see where we are going the next day.
Listen, we're doing, a very good friend of mine and colleague of mine, Dalit Kainer, and myself, we just got accepted to teach a course at the IDC, 3 sessions, about the future workplace and what's going to happen to corporations. Believe it or not, I think your challenge is bigger. Because when you think about what's happening in the commercial world, You already have a lot of trends that companies can adjust to. The hybrid model existed before because people working remotely, virtual teams existed before. The gig economy, I don't know if you're familiar with that term, but I don't have to hire you for long term. I can hire you for a specific job. It doesn't matter where you are. So you have the digital nomads movement. But at the end of the day, people come together to create a very tangible outcome, which is profitability, growth, product. Your job revolves almost entirely around identity. Identity, right? You represent the state of Israel. You're responsible for connecting with the Jewish community. You're responsible to linking with the American people in Chicago, in Wisconsin. It's the very essence of your role is saturated with aspects of identity and geography. And now explain why you're not opening up the prayer to everybody. So I think that is a remarkable, it's a remarkable point to consider. And I wonder how the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is dealing with it. And again, this is not completely disconnected from some of the work that you've done. Your PhD focused on identity, right? You create your whole PhD was specifically about this Austrian Jew, right? Bruno Kreisky, and the entire PhD, I would love to hear, it's such a good segue, right? Was entirely about the conflict of identity.
True. So the conflict of identity, I'll just mention before I get to my PhD, or just to comment on what you said before, I think you're completely right. Nevertheless, we can see in world politics the exact opposite tendency. People who are shifting from against this feeling of a global human being far away, and we see it all over the world in what's happening in the political system and society. People saying, "Hey, step back." You saw it in Great Britain, saw it in other countries. We are first, and who are we in this world? We are scared to lose our identity, our family identity, our communal identity, our national identity, and therefore it can go two ways. It can go towards what you said, a person of the world, a humanistic person of the world that doesn't matter if you're a nomad sitting in India today or in France, or people are going to close their borders. What we are seeing now in COVID, borders are closing, no more solidarity in, who is getting the vaccinations first. Developing world is going to get it next year. The developed world is with the vaccinations now. So solidarity is until a certain point, which is also a challenge. So that's just as a side note for that.
But nothing will stop evolution because look, let me give you an example, right? I needed to renew my work permit in the US. Guess what? No urgency there. I'm working with my clients from here. Suddenly so you can put all the regulations and the borders that you want. The nature of the digital world is such where it will ultimately, you're right. I mean, when it comes to vaccinations, we're still seeing very much the old paradigm of scarcity, competition over limited resources. And yes, I agree with you that humanity is still fighting back for identity, but I just wonder if it can endure. I can't see it winning over time in the face of technology, which I think has always been the case.
I agree with you. I think, though, that I had a very interesting call a few days ago with someone here who was a designer for many years already. He does graphic design, and he worked for the biggest companies in the United States. And he told me that in the last 10 years, he has 1 or 2 companies left with him because everyone outsources it to India. And he said there are very good people there, but they don't know who they are. They pay per work. And that's what you mentioned before. Right. And so currently there's no regulation, but something will happen. And who knows, the world, the regulation that is now currently not on the web, I see it, there will be an evolution which can't be stopped. The digital revolution is there and will continue to be with us forever. Nevertheless, I do see that there will be kickbacks and regulations on many more things connected to commerce. You could not just live in America now and get all your supplies from developing countries around the world for 90% cheaper and still have a growing strong economy in your country, because a lot of people will lose their jobs. So they always did in industrial revolutions. It always happens. People lose their jobs and find other jobs. But we'll see where it goes. But I agree with you. Technology and evolution, you can't stop it. So now back to to identity and
identity and Bruno, because that was
Bruno.
an interesting thing. We had to include it today.
Great. So I wrote my PhD and also my master thesis about a person who is currently mostly forgotten in Israel or in America. But in the 70s, he was the most talked upon leader in the world. So he was really one of the big shots, the superstars, whatever you want to call it. In Israel, he was the most hated person. In Austria, the most loved person. His name was Bruno Kreisky, who was the Chancellor of Austria from 1970 to 1983. We need to remember this is very anti-Semitic Austria during the 70s. Still, it's a country that's called itself the first victim of National Socialism. They saw themselves until the end of the 80s as a victim of the Nazis, not a collaborator of the Nazis, which the history shows us. And he was still chosen. And he was a Jew.
You're saying, he was a Jew. That's the point. That he
correct.
Was Jewish.
He was Jewish, but not practicing, assimilated Jew, very proud of the fact that he was an Austrian, really believed in it. Nevertheless, he never hid the fact that he's Jewish. And he claimed that it was not an interesting thing in his identity and it was not relevant to his identity. He was an Austrian. But every time someone mentioned to him the fact that he's Jewish, whether in Austria, whether in America, whether in Israel especially, he exploded. And this very intellectual Dr. Bruno Kreisky, who spoke to all the world leaders, he had a social policy agendas. When everything connected, someone reminded him that he was Jewish, he really completely worked in a completely non-rational manner. And his relationship with Israel was very, very intense because on the one hand, he called himself a non-Zionist. He said everywhere he's non-Zionist. On the other hand, a lot of his activities, when you read his memoirs, is for the sake of the way he sees the future of the state of Israel. So, and then for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, he was the first European leader to talk about the two-state solution, first to acknowledge the PLO as the legitimate representation of the Palestinian people. And he was called by Begin, by Golda Meir, a self-hating Jew all the time. And he was criticized for all these things. He was very, very critical towards Israeli leadership and said to them they were like the Nazis and the way they're dealing with the Palestinians, very, very critical. On the other hand, he was very emotional towards Gaddafi and towards Assad and said they loved classical music and I felt like I can speak that. So he had a lot of conflicts between himself. And what I try to show in my PhD is his conflict with his Jewish identity, his complex relationship to the state of Israel. On the one hand, I had an interview with someone who was very close to him. Before he died, he really cried from when he talked about Israel and how much he cared about it. So on the one hand, he said things to the outside. On the other hand, you see what he actually thought and actions that he did. So he was a very complicated and a complex man. And I tried to show a rather balanced picture of him with a lot of criticism also, but try to say he's not the devil that they saw in Israel and he's not the angel that they saw him in Austria. And I did it via interviewing about 30 people. A lot of them were ministers in his cabinet who were 93 years old when I got to them. And unfortunately, many of them are not alive anymore. And I interviewed people in Israel. And I also opened archives in Hebrew, which were never opened about these correspondence. And you could see how he gets out of a meeting. I'll give you an example. The one famous thing, probably your parents will remember, not you. In 1973, there was a train. He was the only European country to allow Jewish immigration from the Soviet Union to Israel through a camp in Austria, operated by the Jewish Agency. So he was always criticized, but in the end, he let hundreds of thousands of people coming through Austria. And there was a Syrian-based terrorist organization who kidnapped a train from the Soviet Union to Austria with Jewish immigrants there, asking to release Palestinian prisoners and for Kreisky to close down the Schönau camp for immigration. And eventually, and this was a year after the Munich, what happened in Munich. So there was a trauma of what happens when you try and fight them without success. And he decided to give in to the terrorist demands, close it, but there was no one wounded, no one hurt. The terrorists flew to Libya and the Jewish immigrants on the train were released. And Golda Meir was in Strasbourg that day, and we're talking about this is 4 days before the Yom Kippur War. Golda Meir was in Strasbourg in France. she stopped the convention. She went to Vienna to shout. She went to a meeting with Bruno Kreisky. She shouted at him, what does he think to himself, giving into terrorists, giving into blackmail and more? And she left the meeting, and she was asked by the journalists, the Israeli journalists, how do you summarize the meeting? And she said one sentence only, even a glass of water he didn't offer me. And this was the headlines of all the Israeli newspapers 4 days before the Yom Kippur War. Later, I interviewed the secretary of Bruno Kreisky, who told me he was the most insulted throughout his life because of the sentence, because not only he offered drinks, she baked a cake for her, and she didn't do it. So this was another example of miscommunication. God. And 4 days after the Yom Kippur War, Israel was only dealing with the event in Shona. No one remembers it today. But this was a deception also from the Yom Kippur War. This is another story I wrote about, but we'll not talk about that today. But eventually, this was the very interesting things to see what's written, what was in practice, and what do people who were seeing the things that happen, how do they give what are their thoughts of the events?
But what originally led you to choose to talk about, to do his PhD? What drove you in his direction? Because I'm guessing you found a lot of this out in your research. What was the original motivation?
Original motivation remember we talked about the student council when I was 17. So I got the privilege to be chosen with 40 other people around the country to it's called the Young Diplomats, Young Ambassador program of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Ministry of Education. Every couple was chosen to fly to a different country to be a diplomat there for 2 weeks, meeting politicians, press interviews, presentations. I was chosen to go to Austria, to Vienna. And that was my first time there. And that's when I said I'm going to join the cadet course. I loved every moment. And I also was very curious from Austria. It's like the small sister brother of Germany. And I studied German as a child before that. So I used my German skills there. And then I said, I later on continued my university. I had a professor who came for a program who I really liked. He was an Austrian professor. I said, let's try do something there. And then by chance, I found the name Bruno Kreisky, who I never heard about. And I started liking the fact that he was Jewish and a lot of connections to Israel. And I started flowing with it on my master thesis. And then I expanded it to a PhD later on with the same professor.
I think what I'm taking from our conversation is just how wonderfully proactive you are in taking advantage of opportunities that are presented to you. This balance between something coming to you, like that girl being sick, like you being selected and being sent to Austria, and how you're able to take that opportunity and just spin it up into something magnificent. Because this PhD is definitely something I would read. It's just so interesting. And what I love about it, even before having read it, is this idea of a very nuanced individual. We like to see things in black and white. You either support Israel or you don't. You either support the PLO or you don't. And what's emerging here is a person that refused to fall into any single category and rather shows in a very, very nuanced way how he would behave on multiple fronts that made it possible for him to probably accomplish things that no other person could if they were not so diverse.
Exactly. You got it.
And so much that we can learn from in today, because the world is becoming so darn polarized and everything's going into this black or white kind of dynamic, that I find it to be such an important piece of work. Wow. I feel that I could probably sit with you for a few more hours. Listen, we can't end without, I asked you ahead of this session for a quote that you really like. Do you remember which one you gave me?
I don't even remember. I gave him, no, remind me. I have a few, so remind me which one I gave.
You gave a Shimon Peres quote. Optimists and pessimists die the same way. They just
difference is how they live. Yeah.
Which I thought was such a wonderful quote that I'm going to take with me. And I asked you for, I'm a huge believer now in being a lifelong proactive learner. And I try to tell all my people in the company, and of course all our clients, 300, 400, 500 hours a year, you should be proactively consuming knowledge. I don't care if you're in a museum, take an audio guide, or if you're watching a documentary on Netflix or reading an audiobook or whatever. So I asked you for a source of what you would recommend to read, and you suggested The Death and Life of Great American Cities, right? Published in 1961, and by the writer and activist Jane Jacobs. You said it was a masterpiece that never gets outdated. Just before we bring things to a close, tell me a little bit about why you chose that book.
The reason I chose that book is because it's not one of these historical books or encyclopedias that look outdated today. And try and think about a book that was written in the 60s by a journalist and is still today, we talk about decades later, is still relevant in every piece of information that's written there. And nevertheless, it's still not done according, people still don't work according to that book. So this is the dissonance between, you have such a great handbook of what to do, how to build the best cities. And still, thousands of cities are built around the world. New cities, people are trying to build everything from scratch, but they have the model and they're still not doing it. And this shows us why we're always asking, why is there no peace? We both know what needs to be done and it's still not done. Why are we not succeeding as a society in education? We all know what needs to be done in education. We all heard the TED Talks. It's there. The guidebook is there. And this brings us to the understanding that in the end, it's much more complicated and nuanced, like you said. And those who do want to read, why it's that interesting is because she puts in things there, which are so interesting about the livelihood of a society, not only how to build a city, but what makes a city a real city. And you can see it today around the world, whether it's New York, what makes it a true city, whether it's Tel Aviv or others, what make those cities great. And this is what can make societies great, what can make people great. And if you follow sometimes the best examples and not look and invent the wheel, things are there, just use them. And this, I think, is something that what you said before, gaining knowledge all the time from whoever you talk to, whether it's the person you talk to in the market, a professor of science or a journalist, doesn't matter. We learn from every interaction something new.
Well, I realize that your primary identity today and for years to come is diplomat. But hearing you say this, I'm hearing a fellow educator. Because if you think about it, right, we teachers, we may not be the greatest experts in the fields that we teach, but we are committed to disseminating that knowledge and making sure it doesn't get lost. And I think that speaks exactly to what you said about the fact that there is so much knowledge out there, and that creating the knowledge is no longer the single greatest challenge. It's actually disseminating the knowledge and translating it into reality. That is probably the most important thing for humanity today in closing gaps and taking us to the next level. So I'm definitely adding that book to my wish list. I'm so thankful that you were able to find the time in the incredible schedule that you must be running to have this session with me. I'm thrilled that we were lucky enough that our paths crossed several times and that we were lucky enough to have you in our company. And
I want to thank you, Ariel, for the opportunity. Thank you very much for choosing me. I'm really honored. Really, truly, I'm honored. And I'm honored to have you as my first mentor in the program, my career development and personal development. And I'm sure our paths will meet again in some places. They already did now for this session. So
that's right.
I'm very happy.
Will again.
And I'm many more opportunities to come. Toda rava.
Thank you, and stay healthy. And
you too.
I talked to you before. I love that picture in your background. your wedding day in front of Jerusalem. And I cannot wait to be in Chicago again. I will definitely give you a heads up, and I would ask that you do the same next time you're in Tel Aviv.
Will do. Thank you very much.
Stay healthy, my friend.
Toda rava.